It takes a lot of time and resources to fully power up Pokemon in Pokemon Go. Therefore, making sure you invest in the correct Pokemon is very important. So in this video, I will be going through the best Pokemon of each type for raid attacking, and some budget options that will be generally easier to obtain and to power up. And just before I get into it, I do want to note that I will be quoting ER or equivalent rating for the Pokemon. ER takes into consideration DPS or damage per second, and the total damage output of a Pokemon, which is the amount of damage a Pokemon can do before it faints. But as DPS is more important in raids because you are against a timer, ER gives more weight to DPS in the formula, but it still takes into account TDO. So starting with the bug type, which is strong against Psychic, Dark, and Grass types. This is one of the weaker types in the game because there are stronger types that can do its job better. However, when something does have a double weakness to bug, like Hooper Unbound for example, the best bug type Pokemon can be useful. And although I wouldn't really consider a bug type raid team to be a priority for your resources, there are still some really strong bug type attackers that are worth powering up. So starting with the best, we have Mega Heracross with Struggle Bug and Megahorn, then we have Mega Pinsir with Fury Cutter and X Scissor, followed by Mega Scizor with Fury Cutter and X Scissor, then we have Shadow Vikavolt with Bug Bite and X Scissor, Pheromosa is next with Bug Bite and Bug Buzz, then we have Mega Beedrill with Bug Bite and X Scissor, Volcarona with Bug Bite and Bug Buzz, and Shadow Scizor with Fury Cutter and X Scissor. And for some budget options, I would actually recommend Mega Beedrill because it is the 6th best bug type attacker overall, and Weedle is a fairly common spawn. Not only that, but the Mega Energy for Beedrill is the easiest to get in the game. It only requires 100 Mega Energy to Mega Evolve it for the first time, and you can get enough to Mega Evolve it from the Mega Discovery special research that all trainers receive when they get to level 20. This means you don't actually need to wait for Mega Beedrill to come to raids to get energy for it. And you can also rarely get Beedrill Mega Energy from spinning gyms. One downside though is that its best fast attack Bug Bite is a legacy move, but you could just use Infestation instead and it will still be almost as good. And evolving from Grubbin, we have Vikavolt, which is another good budget option. It is the 14th best bug type attacker, and no raids or legacy moves are required for it. Another option is Yanmega, which is the 16th best bug type attacker. Yanma is a fairly common spawn, and no legacy moves are required for it. However, Yanma does need a Sinnoh Stone to evolve into Yanmega, so it's worth keeping that in mind. I would also consider Scizor and Pinsir, which are very similar, being the 18th and 19th best bug types overall. Scizor, however, again does need a Metal Coat, and Scyther and Pinsir are both rarer in the wild than the previous ones I've mentioned. Moving on to the Dark type, which is strong against Psychic and Ghost types. Now, despite Ghost types also being strong against both Psychic and Ghost types, Dark types are often the better options because they resist Psychic and Ghost type attacks, and with Dark types like Mega Tyranitar, there are some really good options for Dark attackers. So the best Dark type attackers are Mega Tyranitar with Bite and Brutal Swing, Shadow Tyranitar with the same moveset, Shadow Hydreigon also with the same moveset, Mega Absol with Snarl and Brutal Swing, Shadow Darkrai with Snarl and Dark Pulse, Mega Houndoom with Snarl and Foul Play, Shadow Absol with Snarl and Brutal Swing, and Tyranitar with Bite and Brutal Swing. Now for budget options, firstly, even though they aren't the most budget friendly options, being pseudo legendary Pokemon, I would recommend Tyranitar and Hydreigon, both with Bite and Brutal Swing being the 8th and 9th best Dark type attackers. Their pre-evolved forms Larvitar and Dino aren't the most common spawns, but if you do happen to have them and you don't have their shadow forms or Mega for Mega Tyranitar, then they are still great options to use. Hydreigon is a little bit less accessible because Brutal Swing is a legacy move for it. Other budget Pokemon I would recommend are Litten's evolution Incineroar being the 17th best Dark type with Snarl and Darkest Lariat. Starter Pokemon are fairly common and they are potential hatches from the daily adventure egg. We also have Absol, which is the 19th best Dark type attacker. This one, however, is a little bit more of a rarer spawn. Weavile is a good option because it is the 23rd best, but it does want a Sinnoh Stone to evolve from Sneasel, so do bear that in mind. Zoruba's evolution Zoroark is another option, being the 26th best, and Houndoom being the 29th best overall. For the Dragon type, it is super effective against the Dragon type only, but despite this, it is actually one of the best types in the game. There are many Dragon type legendary raid bosses, and so Dragon is a priority when it comes to building a raid team. Some do believe Fairy and Ice to be better options against Dragons because they don't take super effective damage from Dragons like Dragon types do. However, as raids are timed, the most important aspect is beating the raid within the time limit. And a lot of the time, Dragons do offer more DPS than Ice and Fairy type. So it is for this reason that I consider the Dragon type to be a very important type. And the best raid attackers amongst the Dragon types are Eternatus with Dragon Tail and Dynamax Cannon at the top, followed closely by Mega Rayquaza with Dragon Tail and Breaking Swipe. Mega Garchomp is next with Dragon Tail and Breaking Swipe. We then have Mega Salamence with Dragon Tail and Draco Meteor, then Shadow Garchomp with Dragon Tail and Breaking Swipe, Shadow Palkia with Dragon Tail and Draco Meteor, Origin Palkia with Dragon Tail and Spatial Rend, and Shadow Salamence with Dragon Tail and Draco Meteor. Now for the budget options, it is actually a little bit difficult with a lot of Dragon type Pokemon being legendary or pseudo-legendary Pokemon. So I'll go through some budget pseudo Pokemon, and then I'll talk about a more budget-friendly couple of Pokemon that you could use if you don't have access to legendaries or pseudo-legendaries. So firstly, Garchomp is going to be the highest ranking budget Pokemon at the 17th best with Dragon Tail and Breaking Swipe. We then have Haxorus with the same moveset, but unfortunately Breaking Swipe is a legacy move for Haxorus, so it is a bit less accessible. And whilst Haxorus isn't actually a pseudo-legendary, Axew's spawn rate does make it feel like one. Another option is Salamence being the 21st best Dragon type attacker, and Dragonite being the 23rd best with the same moveset. Now these options aren't really super budget friendly, so here are a couple that you could use that are easier to obtain. Firstly, Alolan Exeggutor, which is the 34th best Dragon type attacker, so it is quite a bit lower down, but definitely more common than the pseudo-legendaries. I would also suggest Tyrantrum with Dragon Tail and Outrage, which is the 40th best overall. So really the Dragon type is probably one of the least accessible types. Next up we have the Electric type, which is super effective against flying and water types. Generally this is a pretty good type because the type that it hits for super effective damage are actually very common types. So investing in the electric types will be useful for a lot of scenarios. And the best electric types are actually competitive or better than other types that are super effective against these same types. So the best electric type raid attackers are Regieleki at the top with Thundershock and Thunder Cage. We then have Shadow Raikou with Thundershock and Wild Charge, Zekrom with Charge Beam and Fusion Bolt, Thundurus in its Therian form with Volt Switch and Wild Bolt Storm, Shadow Electivire with Thundershock and Wild Charge, Mega Manectric with Thunderfang and Wild Charge, Xurkitree with Thundershock and Discharge, and Shadow Zapdos with Thundershock and Thunderbolt. And for budget options, I would recommend Electivire, which is the 15th best electric type. Now Electabuzz is a pretty rare spawn, but Elekid is also an avenue to get it through eggs, which it is often available in alongside other baby Pokemon. However, do note that you do need a Sinnoh Stone to evolve Electabuzz into Electivire. Another more budget-friendly Pokemon is Magnezone. This is the 18th best electric type attacker with Volt Switch and Wild Charge, but do note to evolve Magneton into Magnezone, you do need to be near an active magnetic lure module at a Pokestop. However, Magnemite is quite a common spawn, and it is more likely to be a common spawn in events as well compared to Electabuzz. I would also suggest Luxray being the 20th best electric type attacker, and also Pawmot, which is the 21st best with Thundershock and Wild Charge. Do also note you could use Vikavolt, which is the 24th best electric type attacker, and this Pokemon does also double up as a decent budget bug type attacker as well, so it does have some decent value there. Now moving on to the Fairy type, which is strong against Dragon, Fighting and Dark types. This type isn't really a priority to build a raid team for, because it does have lower DPS than a lot of its rival types. However, it does have some unique resistances, meaning it can definitely see some use. The best Fairy type attackers are Mega Gardevoir with Charm and Dazzling Gleam, Shadow Gardevoir with the same moveset, Enamorus in its incarnate form with Fairy Wind and Dazzling Gleam, Xerneas with Geomancy and Moonblast, Shadow Granbull with Charm and Play Rough, Togekiss with Charm and Dazzling Gleam, Gardevoir with Charm and Dazzling Gleam, and Hatterene with the same moveset. I do also want to note some other strong Fairy type attackers that don't have a full Fairy type moveset. They can definitely still be worth using, but it is difficult to rank them amongst the others with their fast attacks not dealing Fairy type damage. It's worth considering Crown Sword Zacian with Metal Claw and Play Rough, Tapu Lele with Confusion and Nature's Madness, Mega Diancie with Rock Throw and Moonblast, Tapu Koko with Volt Switch and Nature's Madness, Tapu Bulu with Bullet Seed and Nature's Madness, and the hero of many battles form of Zacian with Snarl and Play Rough. For budget attackers, I would recommend Togekiss. It's the 6th best Fairy type attacker overall, and as well as Togepi often being in eggs, you can find Togetic in the wild rarely as well. Do note though that you do need a Sinnoh Stone to get Togekiss. Gardevoir is also a solid option itself, being the 7th best Fairy type, and Routes is a fairly common spawn, so it is a good chance you'll be able to get this one. Hatterene could also be an option at 8th best, especially as you can get Max Hatterene as well, so you can leave it at power spots to gain passive candy. And Sylveon, despite its 70 heart requirement, is a good budget option with Eevee being pretty accessible. This is the 9th best fairy type attacker with Charm and Dazzling Gleam. I would also suggest Poplio's evolution Primarina, with it being the 10th best fairy type attacker. Next we have the fighting type, which is strong against normal, rock, steel, ice and dark types. So it is a really useful type that offers high DPS and it can deal super effective damage to a range of types. This is a type I would definitely recommend building a team of. The best Pokemon of this type are Mega Lucario with Force Palm and Aura Sphere, Mega Blaziken with Counter and Aura Sphere, Keldeo in its Resolute form with Low Kick and Secret Sword, Shadow Blaziken with Counter and Aura Sphere, Mega Heracross with Counter and Close Combat, Terrakion with Double Kick and Sacred Sword, Shadow Conkeldurr with Counter and Dynamic Punch, and Lucario with Force Palm and Aura Sphere. And as far as budget fighting types, I would recommend Conkeldurr, which is the 15th best overall. It isn't however always available, and when it tends to be, it is in eggs more often than the wild. A more budget-friendly Pokemon, however, would be Machamp. It is the 21st best fighting type attacker, but Machop is pretty much always available and it is usually a common spawn. And that does bring us to the fire type, which is strong against grass, ice, steel and bug. This is a really strong type, being one of the best in terms of damage. However, it isn't used as often as some other types, but it is still a good choice to build a fire type raid team. The best fire types are Mega Charizard Y with Fire Spin and Blast Burn, Mega Blaziken with the same moveset, Shadow Heatran with Fire Spin and Magma Storm, Reshiram with Fire Fang and Fusion Flare, Mega Charizard X with Fire Spin and Blast Burn, Shadow Blaziken with the same moveset, Shadow Darmanitan with Fire Fang and Overheat, and Shadow Emboar with Ember and Blast Burn. And as far as budget counters, I would recommend Darumaka's evolution Darmanitan, which is the 23rd best fire type attacker. Darumaka is generally a common spawn when it features for events, so you could probably get your hands on it quite easily. Blaziken is also a good option, being the 24th best fire type attacker, Delphox also with it being the 25th best, and both Torchic and Fennekin are common spawns when they are rotated into wild spawns, but most notably you can get them from the daily adventure egg. One downside of both of these Pokemon, however, is the fact that they do want Blast Burn to be at their best, but you could still use them with their other fire type charge attacks, but they won't be ranked quite as high as they are with Blast Burn. Chandelure is another option, with it being the 26th best, however this Pokemon's pre-evolved form Litwick doesn't actually spawn that often. It's mostly available around Halloween time. Some other options in order of effectiveness as a fire type attacker are Emboar with Ember and Blast Burn, which evolves from Tepig, Incineroar with Fire Fang and Blast Burn, which evolves from Litten, and Charizard with Fire Spin and Blast Burn that evolves from Charmander. Do note that like Blaziken and Delphox, they do all want Blast Burn to be at their best. I would also note out of these that Charizard does have a Max and a G-Max form, so if you do have Max Charmander or you have G-Max Charizard, you can leave them at power spots to get more candy. Next up we do have the Flying type, which is strong against fighting, grass and bug types. As a whole, this type isn't really anything special, but it does contain one of the best Pokemon in the game, being Mega Rayquaza with Dragon Ascent. This Pokemon and move combination are stronger than pretty much anything else in the game, so definitely well worth investing in. So the best Pokemon for the flying type are Mega Rayquaza with Air Slash and Dragon Ascent, which is a lot stronger than the other flying type attacking options. We do also have regular Rayquaza with Air Slash and Dragon Ascent, Shadow Toucanon with Peck and Beak Blast, Shadow Moltres with Wing Attack and Sky Attack, Shadow Staraptor with Gust and Fly, Yveltal with Gust and Oblivion Wing, Mega Pidgeot with Gust and Brave Bird, and Shadow Honchkrow with Peck and Sky Attack. Again, like the fairy type, there are a few strong flying type attackers to consider that don't have access to flying type fast attacks, so they are a little bit difficult to rank amongst the rest of them. But I would consider Mega Salamence with Dragon Tail and Fly, Shadow Salamence with the same moveset, regular Salamence with the same moveset, Shadow Lugia with Extra Sensory and Aeroblast Plus if you happen to have the Apex version of it, and Enamorus with Fairy Wind and Fly. For budget options, I would consider Toucanon, which is the 9th best flying type attacker overall, and Pikipek is a fairly common spawn in the wild, but one downside is that it does want Legacy move Beak Blast to shine the most. I would also suggest Staraptor. It is the 12th best flying type attacker, and Starly is a common spawn, so there's a good chance you could build a couple of these. Braviary and Honchkrow would also be good options, being the 15th and 18th best flying type attackers respectively, but Ruffler and Murkrow do tend to spawn less often than Starly, for example. And the 19th best is Unfezant, and Pidove is definitely a common spawn, so you could use that as well. Moving on, we have the Ghost type, which is super effective against Psychic and Ghost types. The top Ghost types can be very powerful and will often be picked for use even if they're weak to the opposing type. However, they do have strong competition in the Dark types, but what are the best Ghost types? So starting at the top, we do have the very powerful Dawnwings Necrozma with Shadow Claw and Moongeist Beam. If there is any ghost Pokemon to get and to power up, this would be the one, because even when it's not got a type advantage, it still is very strong. Mega Gengar is next up with Lick and Shadow Ball, and again this Pokemon is very strong and I would recommend having at least one of these maxed out if you can. It is also very strong as a poison type attacker, despite it not having a poison fast attack. Next we have Shadow Chandelure with Hex and Shadow Ball, Mega Banette with Shadow Claw and Shadow Ball, Shadow Gengar with Lick and Shadow Ball, Lunala with Shadow Claw and Shadow Ball, Shadow Giratina in its altered form with Shadow Claw and Shadow Force, and Giratina Origin with the same moveset. For budget options, you could use Chandelure, which is the 12th best ghost type attacker, but like I mentioned before, Litwick is rare outside of Halloween, but Chandelure is a good value Pokemon that doubles up as a budget fire type attacker, and it has a Mega coming in the future, so bear that in mind. Ghastly's Evolution Gengar is perhaps the most budget friendly ghost option, because Ghastly does spawn quite commonly. Now for the grass type that is strong against water, ground and rock, it's a good type in the fact that it has some important coverage of these types, but it is really only the top few options that are worth powering up. So the best grass type attackers are Mega Sceptile with Bullet Seed and Frenzy Plant, Mega Venusaur with Vine Whip and Frenzy Plant, Kartana with Razor Leaf and Leaf Blade, Zarude with Vine Whip and Power Whip. You can also use this Pokemon as a decent dark type attacker as well, however it is a mythical Pokemon that doesn't appear in raids, so it's not that easy to get candy for. We then have Shaman Skyform with Magical Leaf and Grass Knot, Shadow Tangrowth with Vine Whip and Power Whip, Shadow Venusaur with Vine Whip and Frenzy Plant, and Shadow Sceptile with Bullet Seed and Frenzy Plant. As far as budget grass types go, I would recommend Rillaboom, with it being the 10th best with Razor Leaf and Grass Knot. This will however be upgraded to Frenzy Plant after its community day. And Grookey, its pre-evolved form, is not only available in daily adventure eggs, but Max Grookey is sometimes available in max battles as well, so I would recommend picking up that version if you can. Then you can use it in both aspects of the game. Occasionally G-Max Rillaboom does return to the game as well, and this is actually the best grass type attacker for max battles. And with Rillaboom having a max and G-Max form, you can leave it at power spots after a max battle to get extra candy. I would also recommend Meowscarada, which is the 12th best overall with Leafage and Frenzy Plant, and Sprigatito is often a common spawn, and it is available from the daily adventure egg as well. Again, like most starters though, its downside is that it wants legacy move Frenzy Plant to be at its best, but it is still viable with Grass Knot instead if you can't get that move. Chestnut is another good option, evolving from Chespin, which is available in the daily adventure egg as well. I would also recommend Roserade, which is the 16th best overall, and it requires no legacy moves. Roselia can be a common spawn when in rotation, and Badoo is often available in eggs. Do note though, you do need a Sinnoh Stone for the evolution of Roselia into Roserade. You could also use Decidueye with Magical Leaf and Frenzy Plant, Sceptile with Bullet Seed and Frenzy Plant, and Venusaur with Vine Whip and Frenzy Plant. Next up we have the ground type, which is strong against electric, rock, fire, steel and poison types, so it can hit a lot of types for super effective damage. Some of the top ground type attackers do comparatively a lot of damage, so it's very competitive with other types, and the ground type is the only type that can hit electric type Pokemon for super effective damage, so it does also have that niche advantage to it. Now the best ground type attackers are Primal Groudon with Mudshot and Precipice Blades, and again this is one of those Pokemon that should be an overall target to have maxed out, because it is one of the best Pokemon in the game. We also have Mega Garchomp with Mudshot and Earth Power, Shadow Groudon with Mudshot and Precipice Blades, Landorus in its Therian form with Mudshot and Sandsear Storm, Shadow Garchomp with Mudshot and Earth Power, Shadow Excadrill with Mud Slap and Scorching Sands. This Pokemon is also a decent steel type attacker. We also have Shadow Rhyperior with Mud Slap and Earthquake, and Groudon with Mudshot and Precipice Blades. And for some budget options, despite it being not the most budget friendly because it is a pseudo legendary, I would recommend Garchomp, with it being the 11th best ground type, and it also doubles up as a decent budget dragon type attacker as well, so it is a high value Pokemon to get. Gible is quite rare though, but it is often available in Adventure Sync eggs. For more budget friendly options, I would recommend Rhyperior, which is the 14th best ground type attacker overall, with Mudslap and Earthquake. Rhyhorn is generally a common spawn when it is in rotation, so it shouldn't be too difficult to get your hands on some. The only difficulty is having the Sinnoh Stone to evolve Rhydon into Rhyperior if you haven't got any. You could however not evolve it and just use Rhydon with the same moveset. It's a little bit lower down the list though at the 23rd best, but it's still a good budget option. Excadrill is another great budget option, being the 15th best with Mudslap and Scorching Sand. Max Drillbur is also available, so you can get extra candy by leaving it at power spots. And Max Excadrill is a very strong Pokemon in max battles as well, being a strong tank, healer, and ground type attacker. I would also recommend Mamoswine with Mudslap and high horsepower. Again, you will want a Sinnoh Stone to evolve Piloswine into Mamoswine. This Pokemon though does double up as a strong ice type attacker as well. Speaking of which, next up we have the ice type, which is strong against dragon, flying, grass, and ground types. This type is not always the best pick for the situation, but it is very useful for those raid bosses that are 2 times weak to ice. It's also worth noting that it's not the easiest type to build a raid team of, because the good ice types are pretty rare outside of winter events and seasonal spawns. But I definitely would recommend investing in some of the top ice type attackers. So the best ice type raid attackers are White Kyurem with Ice Fang and Ice Burn, and despite it not having an ice type fast attack, I would put Black Kyurem up there as well with Dragon Tail and Freeze Shock. We also have Shadow Mamoswine with Powder Snow and Avalanche, Shadow Weavile with Ice Shard and Avalanche, Baxcalibur with Ice Fang and Avalanche, Mega Abomasnow with Powder Snow and Weather Ball Ice, Mamoswine with Powder Snow and Avalanche, Mega Glalie with Frost Breath and Avalanche, and Shadow Aurorus with Frost Breath and Weather Ball Ice. And as far as budget options, I would recommend Mamoswine, as I mentioned before, for the ground type as well. This is a good value budget Pokemon to have. I would also recommend Glaceon, which is the 10th best with Frost Breath and Avalanche. With Eevee being a common spawn and available in max battles, you can quite easily get enough candy for this evolution. Do note though, to evolve Eevee into Glaceon, you need to evolve it when you're stood next to a Pokestop with an active Glacial Lure module. And if you don't have a Glacial Lure module, I would recommend doing showcases because you can get them for placing highly in showcases. Titan is also a good option, being the 11th best with Ice Shard and Avalanche. However, Cetoddle is a bit rare outside of specific events. Weavile is a good alternative, being the 12th best with the same moveset. Sneasel again is a little bit rare, and you will want a Sinnoh Stone to evolve it, but it does also double up as a budget dark type as well. Moving on, we do have the normal type, which can't do super effective damage to any type, so not really worth building a raid team of normal type Pokemon. But if you did want to know out of curiosity what are the best normal type attackers, they are Shadow Regigigas with Zen Headbutt and Crush Grip, regular Regigigas with the same moveset, Shadow Porygon Z with Lock On and Hyper Beam, Mega Lopunny with Pound and Hyper Beam, Meloetta in its Aria form with Quick Attack and Hyper Beam, Xerneas with Tackle and Giga Impact, Porygon Z with Lock On and Hyper Beam, and Shadow Ursaluna with Tackle and Swift. We then do have the Poison type, which is strong against Grass and Fairy type attacks. Unfortunately, this is one of the worst types in the game for raid attacking, because they generally aren't as good as their rival types. Out of any of the types, I would actually set this one as one of the lowest priority in terms of building a raid team of it. But if you did want to make a raid team or have a couple as backup, the best poison type raid attackers are Eternatus at the top with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb, Mega Beedrill with the same moveset, Nihilego with the same moveset, Naganadel again with the same moveset, Shadow Toxicroak with the same moveset as well, Roserade also with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb, Shadow Alolan Muck with Poison Jab and Gunk Shot, and the Shadow Kanto Muck with the same moveset. I do also want to note a couple of extra strong poison type attackers that don't have a poison type fast attack, but they do still rank highly. Mega Gengar is high up there with Lick and Sludge Bomb. We also have Shadow Gengar with the same moveset, Mega Venusaur with Vine Whip and Sludge Bomb, and Shadow Venusaur with the same moveset. For budget options, I would actually recommend Roserade with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb. This Pokemon is the 6th best poison type attacker, and as I mentioned before, Roselia is a fairly common spawn and Badoo is often in eggs. The Pokemon does also double up as a budget grass type attacker as well, so it does have some good value. Now I do also want to mention Overqwil. This Pokemon is the 11th best poison type with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb. It evolves from Hisuian Quillfish, which you can usually get from 7km eggs that you receive from opening gifts from your friends. And it does also sometimes feature in the wild for certain events as well. But unfortunately, its evolution requirement is a bit rough for free-to-play players because it requires you to make it your buddy and win 10 raids to evolve it. However, if you do happen to have a Hisuian Quillfish and you want to evolve it, you can use your daily free raid pass each day, and you can also take advantage of raid days, which happen pretty often, and they give you 5 free raid passes to do raids on that day. A more simple budget-friendly option, however, is Toxicroak with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb. It evolves from Croagunk, which is a pretty common spawn. And for the Psychic type, which is super effective against fighting and poison types, this type has got some very high damage dealing Pokemon. However, it is only strong against 2 types, so it's a little bit limited. I would still focus on building a team for it though, because when its time comes, it is very strong. I just want to preface this by mentioning that Mega Mewtwo X and Y are most likely going to come to the game in 2026 because of the 10th anniversary of Pokemon Go. And these two will be the 2 best Psychic type attackers when they release. But for now, the best Psychic type attackers are Shadow Mewtwo with Psycho Cut and Psystrike. This Pokemon is particularly strong compared to the rest. We also have Mega Alakazam with Confusion and Psychic, Mega Latios with Zen Headbutt and Psychic, Mewtwo with Psycho Cut and Psy Strike, Mega Gallade with Confusion and Psychic, Mega God of War with the same moveset, Mega Metagross with Zen Headbutt and Psychic, and Shadow Latios with Zen Headbutt and Psychic. And as far as budget options go, I would recommend Metagross even though it is a pseudo legendary. Beldum is quite often featured for events, so you might be able to get a hold of this one. And Metagross is also a strong steel type attacker as well. And it does also have a max form in the game, so if you can get max Beldum, you can leave it at power spots to get more candy. And Max Metagross is actually a strong tank and a decent steel type attacker for max battles as well. I would also recommend Espeon with Eevee being very accessible like I mentioned before. It is worth noting though it is a little bit time consuming to evolve Eevee into Espeon because you need to walk 10 kilometers with it set as your buddy and then evolve it in the day. If you haven't used the Eevee name trick though, you could set Eevee's nickname to Sakura and then evolve it to get Espeon instantly. This however will only work once, so do use it wisely. Again, like Beldum, Max Eevee is in the game, so you can get candy through that. Alakazam is also a good budget option, with Abra being quite a common spawn generally, and Alakazam is the 23rd best Psychic type. Do note though that it does want Legacy move Psychic to be at its best, but you could still use it with Future Sight instead. The next type I want to go through is the Rock type, which is strong against Flying, Fire, Ice and Bug types. This type has a lot of powerful Pokemon and some really good coverage against some pretty common types. It's especially useful a lot for the Flying type legendaries, of which there are a lot of them. And the best Rock type raid attackers are Shadow Rhyperior with Smackdown and Rock Wrecker, Mega Tyranitar with Smackdown and Stone Edge, Mega Diancie with Rock Throw and Rock Slide, Shadow Rampardos with Smackdown and Rock Slide, Shadow Tyrantrum with Rock Throw and Meteor Beam, Shadow Gigalith with Smackdown and Meteor Beam, Mega Aerodactyl with Rock Throw and Rock Slide, and Shadow Tyranitar with Smackdown and Stone Edge. For budget options, I would recommend Rhyperior, which is the 9th best Rock type attacker. Like I mentioned before, Rhyhorn is a fairly common Pokemon, and Rhyperior does also double up as a budget ground type attacker. It does however want Legacy move Rock Wrecker to be at its best as a Rock type, which can make it a little bit more inaccessible, but you could use Stone Edge if not. A good alternative I would recommend is Rampardos, because it is the 10th best Rock type, but it doesn't need any Legacy moves. However, Cranidos is actually quite a bit rarer than Rhyhorn. Tyrantrum is also a good option, being the 12th best with Rock Throw and Meteor Beam, although again Tyrant is rarer than Rhyhorn. Gigalith is another option, with it being the 14th best with Smackdown and Meteor Beam, however Meteor Beam is a Legacy move for it. But Roggenrola is a fairly common spawn. Tyranitar could also be an option despite it being a pseudo-legendary. Larvitar is quite rare outside of specific events, but it is occasionally obtainable in eggs as well. Next up we have the Steel type, which is strong against Rock, Ice and Fairy types. This type isn't actually called on for too often, but some of the top Steel type attackers are very strong and relevant in the game. The best Steel type attackers are Crown Zamazenta with Metal Claw and Behemoth Bash, Crown Zacian with Metal Claw and Behemoth Blade. Both of these double up as very strong max battle Pokemon as well as tanks and steel type attackers. Next we have Duskmane Necrozma with Metal Claw and Sunsteel Strike, Mega Metagross with Bullet Punch and Meteor Mash, Shadow Metagross with the same moveset, Mega Lucario also with the same moveset, Shadow Dialga with Metal Claw and Iron Head, and Metagross with Bullet Punch and Meteor Mash. For budget options, I would consider Metagross, as I mentioned before, despite it being a pseudo-legendary. A more budget-friendly Pokemon, however, would be Excadrill, which does double up as a decent budget ground type attacker as well. And while quite a bit lower down the list, if you are looking for more budget-friendly options, I would recommend Bisharp with Metal Claw and Iron Head, which does have an evolution, but it is a bit of a rough evolution requirement, so Bisharp would be better as a budget option. Also Aggron with Iron Tail and Heavy Slam, with Aron being a common encounter in the wild. You could also use Empoleon with Steel Wing and Flash Cannon. Its pre-evolved form Piplup is a possible hatch from the Daily Egg. And lastly, we do have the Water type, which is strong against Fire, Ground and Rock types. The best Pokemon of this type are very competitive with rival types, so it generally isn't a bad type to invest in and build a raid team of. The best Water type attackers are Primal Kyogre with Waterfall and Origin Pulse. This is one of the best Pokemon in the game, so well worth investing in. We also have Mega Swampert with Water Gun and Hydro Cannon, Shadow Kyogre with Waterfall and Origin Pulse, Mega Blastoise with Water Gun and Hydro Cannon, Mega Gyarados with Waterfall and Hydro Pump, Kyogre with Waterfall and Origin Pulse, Shadow Swampert with Water Gun and Hydro Cannon, and Shadow Samurott with Waterfall and Hydro Cannon. For budget options, I would recommend Quaquaval, which is the 12th best with Water Gun and Hydro Cannon. This Pokemon evolves from Quaxly, which again is available in the Daily Egg. Primarina is also an option, with it being the 13th best with Waterfall and Hydro Cannon. This Pokemon evolves from Poplio, which is also in the Daily Egg. And Primarina does also double up as a budget fairy type attacker as well, so it does have some good value. And also Greninja with Water Shuriken and Hydro Cannon, which evolves from Froakie, another starter available in the Daily Egg. And do note that all of these budget options I've mentioned so far do want Legacy move Hydro Cannon to be at their best, which does make them a little bit inaccessible, so you could use other charged water type attacks they may have. Or you could use Kingler with Bubble and Crab Hammer, which requires no Legacy moves and it's the 16th best. And if you happen to have the Max or the G-Max form of Kingler, you can leave it at power spots to get more candy. And with that said, if you did find this video helpful, I recommend checking out this video on the screen next, and I'll catch you in the next one.